Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Jonny Pardoe. Today, we're going to be talking about self-confidence for teenagers and parents. So if you're a parent listening today, we've got a ton of value for you with my great guest, Laura. So I'm just going to introduce Laura very quickly, who she is and her story a little bit. So Laura is a teen and parent well-being coach. She helps teenagers with feelings of stress, anxiety, and low self-confidence. She also coaches their parents to support their teens in their transformations too. Really important work. And Laura and I are also part of our great mentor, Joseph McClendon's Neuroencoding Institute. We also had Joseph on a few weeks ago in the community, getting to meet so many great people like Laura. And I know Laura's doing a lot of great work for parents and families out there. So welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad we could have you on today. So, Laura, just kind of as an introduction a little bit and get to know you a little bit more. I know a little bit of your story, of course, although obviously a lot more to learn, and I'm sure the listeners are looking forward to learning from you today. So, what inspired you first? Tell us a little bit about your story in terms of what inspired you to go out and help teenagers so much.
Well, that's a big question. There's a big part of it that's my own personal story. Just reflecting on my life and where I'm at and realizing that kind of my path of life really in some ways took some bad turns, and some of those bad turns kind of originated from feeling low self-confidence and self-esteem from the time I remember being conscious of that, which was like 7th grade. And it's almost like I built this life based off of, that path. And then there were some things that didn't work out. They weren't good. They weren't positive. And so there came a time when I realized I had to make some changes. And right at that time, simultaneously, it was very serendipitous, I guess. My daughter was struggling a lot, and she was in middle school, and I was seeing kind of like what the effects of social media and all the current issues in our culture were doing to her and her peers. And so it's kind of like it all came together. And then I had mentioned in the past that, in a different topic, and don't want to get too personal on about it, but the mental health aspect is very, very important to me personally, because I lost my nephew who was 20 years old. He took his own life. And so when I combined all those things together, the kind of mental health aspect of it, and I'm a professional in the health and wellness field, and then having these issues with my daughter, as well as like reflecting on my life, that's when I'm like, it all came together in this like perfect magical brew of what I wanted to do and how I wanted to contribute to the world.
Yeah, no, totally. Thank you for sharing what got you into that whole space. And yeah, there's obviously things like you touched on, like there's the whole social media aspect. And I wanna kind of touch on that a little bit today. Are there like perhaps a few cases? Are there like there's obviously many reasons that can affect our self-confidence, how we feel about ourselves. Are there perhaps in your field like a few, maybe like 3 or 4 common ones you see that are really impacting on people?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. With teenagers, it's like their number one is their physical appearance. Like that is just like massive. And we had that growing up. Like it was all about, that's when you become so conscious of that, how you stack up. So it's all what it is it's really social comparison. Like we're comparing ourselves to others and how we measure. And so that's really a thing that has like been around since the beginning of time. It's like that's an evolutionary thing. Like, are we good enough to be in our tribe, and where are we in the pecking order of this world? And so there becomes this feeling of lack if you compare yourself and you don't feel like you measure up. So physical appearance is a huge one, and then just the internal belief on your ability. So where teenagers, a lot of their achievements are based off of school, their grades, academics, obviously, and then they are extracurriculars. So that's another place where they are measuring themselves and how they compare. And, the reason why, in my opinion, this has gotten worse and more difficult, and we have more problems now, is because the parents are now measuring themselves about how they measure up as parents. So if you have a kid that's a straight A student and an all-star athlete, you're feeling real good about yourself. And if you don't have someone that's not, as quite a, obvious achiever, you feel like you're less than. And that's what parents, and social media is the perfect place to display that. You get to display your kids' trophies and this and that and the other. And so that's why it's just like there's more of an outlet for people to understand like where they fit in that pecking order.
Oh wow, yeah, that's a really good point, but makes so much sense at the same time. And if you're a parent listening, I think maybe be able to. I'm not a parent, so I can't speak for parents, but maybe it's something that resonates with them. But like, just wow, yeah, that makes sense. Like looking at your child doing really really well. Yeah, like and comparison, like you say on the social media side, outside of that, is such a challenge these days as well. So with like social media, are there any particular like or the comparison, are there any particular things you've seen work effectively to kind of ease that out a little bit so that people are able to validate themselves a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So, I think if there's someone, whether it's a teenager or adult, spending a lot of time on it, you kind of have to look at, I always ask, what is the intent? Because there are some positive to social media, like
Yeah.
during COVID lockdown time, like that's how people stayed connected. Like if you didn't have that, like you didn't really have much of anything because there was no way to connect. You're not like making individual phone calls, although that's a great idea to people, but it's the fastest, easiest way to connect to the biggest group of people. So I don't want to ever say it's all bad. And
Absolutely.
I think what it is just like noticing yourself, like what is the intent behind the amount of time you're spending on it or what it is that you're doing on it. So the people with the worst mental health in relation to social media, they're the ones who are mindlessly scrolling through and they're looking and looking. The ones who have the healthiest kind of perspective on it, they're engaging in it. They're having conversations, they're making comments. And so that's kind of one part of it. The other part is how much are you allowing, like especially for teenagers, but I know it's true for adults too.
Yeah.
The number of likes you get or the number of reposts or whatever shares, how much are you letting that affect what you believe about yourself? So if I just got one like on a post, and I'm 14, I'm feeling really self-conscious, really, really self-conscious. And so in order to kind of bypass that issue, we just need to have awareness for our teenagers. Like, why are you giving the power of what you think about yourself to all these other people? And so to me, it's like a power control issue. So what I say, like I give like the simple analogy of a remote control. You're handing over the remote control to your life to other people, and you're letting them change the channel and program what you think about yourself. It's like, whoa, why are you giving them that? Like, yeah, that's your remote. You take your remote and you decide like what you think. It's your decision of what you think about yourself. And that's really honestly what it comes down to is it's a decision, it's a choice. And although it's kind of a process over time, there also is, in my opinion, a very black and white decision. Like you can go, fork in the road, this way or this way. You can decide to feel good or you can decide to feel bad. And the minute, like, if I could get teenagers to like really understand that and really embody that and live that way, they'd be a whole lot happier. And I know it's true because that's what I did for myself. I decided I'm not letting other people control me anymore. And I decided I'm going to decide how I feel. And now it really stems back to, like I said, when I was 13, that's where I didn't have that power. I remember sitting in the cafeteria at school in junior high, which is like the most painful years of almost every human's life. Like nobody really has like great memories of middle school or junior high, but I remember just not feeling significant. Tony Robbins talks about the 6 human needs, and one of them is significance. And so that's like, I didn't think I was significant because I wasn't, kind of in the in crowd or in the conversation. I was kind of on the outskirts. And so I let that situation define who I was as a person. And that's who I thought I was. And, which is funny because I don't think other people thought that. Like I, became very significant in high school. I was very involved and very well known, but it was like how I felt on the inside, and which is funny. And so it's like, there's just a lot of mental work that goes into this. And it's something that's not really inherently, like, you're not necessarily born. Although I think there are some people that are just, they come out of their mamas and they are just confident as, it's everything. But most of us have to, it's a learned skill, and it's also a decision.
Hmm. Yeah, I like what you said about the remote control, letting someone, that's a really good analogy of letting on control and being able to actually bring it back to, it starts with awareness. And I think you mentioned the word awareness a couple of times there as well, comes with the awareness that actually, hang on, I am validating myself on someone else's opinion or someone else's activity and coming back. So yeah, and sometimes even though people don't recognize it as well, that's another good point. I like what you made there about actually people may be perceiving you in a different way to actually how you're feeling as well. Like there are some people, some of the most well-known people I know, influencers, role models I got, and they're like, I still get scared going on stage. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say Tony Robbins is one of them, but like someone like Mel
Yeah.
Robbins, obviously no relation at all. Like she says, I get nervous when I'm going onto stage. Dean Graziosi, one of Tony's partners, says, do you know what? When I was doing this, I got really nervous about coming on stage today. And he's he's like one of the best marketers out there. Even Grant Cardone admits, yeah, I get fear too. So sometimes actually what it appears on the outside, it's like, maybe there's a difference in there. So I appreciate you for sharing that. And I get that as well. But there's nothing more than, being able to be yourself and validate yourself. So I appreciate that message you were giving there. So just moving on to the parenting side and kind of the parent relationship with a teenager a little bit. So obviously, probably in your work, I imagine there's a lot of work or kind of a lot of discussion rather around the relationship between the parent and the teenager. Now, what would you say about the work of a parent with their own relationship with themselves first? Is that important too?
I'm literally so glad you said that, because that's everything. I mean, that is everything. So here's an example. I have a client who is, got some low self-esteem, worried about her appearance, has some body dysmorphia, had a past eating disorder. And so I'm working with her, and I had to meet with the mom the other day, and we got on a Zoom. And the first thing she said was, I don't look very good today. I didn't have time to do my hair. And I'm like, whoa, like that was the first thing out of her mouth. And I thought, well, if she's, projecting that consciously or subconsciously, verbally or non-verbally, her daughter is going to be picking up on that energy. And so I would love for a parent to come on and be all looking crazy, like they just rolled out of bed, and be like, hey, how's it going? I'm here for my meeting, and not care about what I think, because why would I care about what a parent, And so it's like everything that teenagers learn. In fact, the way they learn is through modeling. They mimic their parents. They see it and they observe it, and they live that way. So a parent really needs to work on their own, for sure, self-confidence in order for that child to, just mimic that behavior. And that's why it becomes subconscious, because they're with it every day and they see it. It just becomes part of who they are.
And do you find sometimes the parents are not necessarily aware of that, and they're maybe focusing more on the relationship with their child or their teenager?
Yeah, I think that's the majority. So most people come and say, fix my child. There's something wrong with my child. Here, work with my child. And it's like, well, yes. And I would love to do some coaching with you as well, because you guys are in a relationship and you're with your child. I get to see them once a week. You spend the rest of the time. So in order to, it's a relationship that we need to kind of address both ends on.
Yeah, no, great point. I just thought I'd bring, and outside of necessarily parenting and that side, there's also like our relationships with, maybe it's a close intimate relationship, our relationship, just transferring this out of like sort of parenting, our relationship with our friends, our relationship with at work with our co-workers, or maybe in business, we're in business and with business partners, those kind of things, or even customers, clients, those kind of things. Just again, wanting to kind of like emphasize that, sometimes we look externally and there's these relationships that absolutely we want to work on. That's amazing. We focus on that.
Mhm.
And credit to anyone who recognizes that, want to improve that. That's brilliant. But yeah, just
Mhm.
coming back to ourselves first. So that's why I asked that question. So appreciate the input on that one.
Yeah.
So my next question is basically about, or kind of next thing I wanted to discuss is about basically support and guidance for like parents in terms of the parenting and helping support their teenager. Now, this isn't necessarily just again in parenting, but we're talking about the purposes of it here. We're talking about parenting for parents who perhaps are a little bit, they know there needs to be a change. And again, like I'm not one to go out in any area of life and be like, you need to do this, and this. I can only teach them what I know. And like any of us as coaches, we just guide people, right? But like any parent who's like thinking, I do actually want help. They're not being told they need help, but they do actually want help. They do want that guidance with their teenager. Yet they're a little bit nervous about actually going and seeking support because of what they may be viewed as for getting that support. Do you uncover that kind of like fear of judgment? Does that come across any parts of your work, like the fear of judgment that they're going out and getting support?
I hope not.
Mm,
Because and that's why I love coaching, because to me it's like a positive thing that's not an admission of something being wrong with them. It's just an admission of wanting to grow and become better.
mm,
And I think in theory, every human should want to grow and become better. Nobody is perfect. And so just seeking that support to me seems like a super positive thing. But I see what you're saying, that, you know, to go back to like that parent who has this kid with the straight A's and the all-star athlete, there's probably things going on inside that house that, it's all show on the outside, but there might be some issues going on the inside. That parent might, yeah, they might feel shame, or they might feel embarrassment about, oh yeah, I'm going to a coach and I'm getting help. They
mm.
might not necessarily, you're right. I mean, I think that's totally true. I just hope maybe we could debunk the, feeling that there's anything wrong with getting support or learn. I mean, really, it's just like learning. It's educating. It's like it shouldn't be any different from like going and getting a book and learning and teaching yourself, and you're just getting outside support. It's kind of the same thing. We're just like taking in new information.
Yeah, no, that's a really good example of the book. So obviously the ones who you've worked with and the ones who are seeking support, that's great. They're out there, they're doing it, that guidance. I'm just thinking there's quite a lot of us out there, and I've been there in the past, like not in this area of life, but in certain areas where we're like, I don't want to get support. What if people judge me? And that could always be in the head. So I'm so glad you said, it's like going out and helping someone who might be on the fence of like going and getting that support. That's awesome that you talked about like the book, and actually that's a tool. That's like getting a tool for growth.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And also, I think when people get in enough pain, they'll do anything for help. And so there becomes a time when you just have to not worry about your reputation is going to be, and that's the thing. I think there's a lot of people that are right on the edge, on that borderline of they need help, but they just can't face it. And that's
Mm,
kind of what you're talking about is what does
yeah,
that say about me as a person if I need help? But I don't think there's anything wrong with needing help. I think everybody needs help.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, totally. We all, even people always growing, like the role models I certainly admire, always looking for like their mentors, always looking for new opportunities. Like even Joseph, we follow, he has his mentors, he's always learning. So yeah, we're all growing, aren't we? Right. So yeah, that's a great point. So the kind of next thing I wanted to touch on is obviously like social media. I mean, with like social media, are there any, have you like with social media, is there any like potential good you've seen from it, like for like teenagers that they've been able to develop new opportunities as well? We obviously talked about it being a challenge, but I just wondered if you had seen any good opportunities come from it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my kids teach me new stuff all the time. They're like, "Oh, I have this new recipe." And my daughter follows a lot of like health and wellness people, and she'll, come to me with certain health facts. Or my other daughter will learn about crafts. She's like, "Oh, I know how to make this new type of slime or whatever." So it's like honestly, there is like a lot of learning that comes from it. And my son the other day, he was telling me something he learned that was also health related. And I was like, "Oh, it's like they have access to information which could be super positive or also super negative." But I agree, there is some positives to it.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Yeah, and obviously, like we're touching on, like the COVID case is a great way to communicate. But yeah, again, just coming back to our internal and making sure we're not getting too validated by it as well.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Laura, like, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing about what you've discovered in your work with teenagers and parents. And I think there's so many golden nuggets we can pick out of this for the listener who may be feeling some of these things. But yeah, just before we kind of like round off today, are there any final points or point that you'd like to share? And where can people find you if they want to find out a little bit more about your work?
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so I'm on social media, Instagram and Facebook at Positively Healthy Coaching. And I'm Laura Ollinger, so Positively Healthy Coaching. And yeah, I have a tidbit, which is, so I did a workshop yesterday for some parents, and I had some follow-up after, and one dad came to me and said, "We're really trying to help our son have more self-confidence. He just doesn't feel good about himself." And the mom had mentioned he gets picked on a little bit, not to the point of bullying, but they weren't sure like where that line was. And they're like, "We just keep trying to help him and get him to tell him to feel good about himself and all this stuff." And what I have to say to that is a parent can do everything. And sometimes they have to realize that they don't have the power to change their child. The child has to decide for themselves. It has to be like I said, that internal decision. And so it's just at what point does that teenager get in enough pain that they then decide, okay, I'm ready to change? And so I think in some ways I want to relieve the parents a little bit of the complete responsibility for the outcome of their child. Because at the end of the day, I did have another client who her son was struggling, and she said, "I feel like I'm a failure." And I said, "Oh my goodness, you're talking to me right now. We're working on this. If anything, that means that you're the opposite of a failure. That means you're seeking guidance, seeking growth, seeking support. And to me, that makes you like a fantastic mom." And she's like, "Oh, wow." And so I think I just want to like relieve parents of the pressure that they feel about who they are as a parent based off of what their child does. Because you can do everything right, and sometimes that's still not enough. And so you have to transfer a little bit of that ownership onto that teenager. And the older they get, the more ownership they need to take on who they are and who they want to be in this world. And so, yeah, I mean, it's super fun work. I love what I do. And yeah, I appreciate the time being here today.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And again, just like emphasizing that point on seeking growth is a strength or that guidance. So loving what you said there and rounding off today. So thank you so much, Laura. Appreciate you being on today. So that concludes our episode for today. And remember, you are in control of your own self-esteem and confidence.